Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and I'd like to welcome you to the show. For those of you who are new to the show, the Umoja Circle is an African-centered talk show. And what I mean by African-centeredness, we're here to correct errors where errors are found, and to introduce fact where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And there is no medium out there to me that really gets into the weeds of why we function the way we function. I like to use history to bring us to the present, because unless you want to understand what is necessary to deal with the complexity of the present, you got to understand how they came to be.
That's right.
And if you don't understand the present moment, then you would never understand the complexity fully, and you'd be able to be actually manipulated. And also, I found that in order to bring a shift in your consciousness, there must be dialogue with new ideas.
I love that.
And today we're going to continue. This is the fourth show on a topic that is very important. And even though we were doing, like I said, the fourth half-hour show, this topic would require months and months and months of maybe a master's or doctoral a study in order to deal with this. It's based on this book that was done by this great scholar, Dr. Joy DeGruy, called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And like we've been saying throughout this dialogue and discussion, that the post-traumatic slave syndrome seems kind of familiar, similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. That's only coming into into the discussion in the last 10, 20 years or so. But we're here to say that you can't deal with trauma on an individual basis. We understood, we talked about in the first show what trauma is. It is an overwhelming fear that happened, incident that override the normal stresses that we can, as human beings, can deal with. As human beings, we can deal with stress. Okay, I've been in the military. There were stresses of basic training. There's the stresses of taking a test. We can take on a little bit of stress and some stresses. What about bills this week? Whatever those stresses are, we are built that way. But there is certain things that happen to individuals that is sustained and so overwhelming that it overwhelms your mind, the normal mental clarity of thought, and it can last a lifetime. And again, to help me discuss this topic is my guest, Dr. Uchenna Ume, who she likes to be called Dr. Lulu. Again, she is a clinical pediatrician who did her residency training at Howard University Hospital. She had her own private practice after she left Howard in South Carolina in Lancaster for 15 years. She was also a veteran of the Air Force, go blue, as a lieutenant colonel, and she as a commander at both Maxwell
and at Lackland.
Air Force Base. So I'd like to welcome back to this port, to number 4, and we could do much more. But
I see a 10 in our future.
Yeah, but welcome. When we last talked, the last show, we started off talking about ACEs and those type of things that affects adverse childhood experiences that you get from your adults.
It just has to, for ACEs to be relevant, it must have occurred before the age of 18. And while they have they have 10 factors that they look at, they are much more than that. I don't have to necessarily experience trauma. If you, Smokey, my dear friend, experiences trauma, that will affect me as well.
Yeah.
So whereas they have 10 factors, and I don't know if you want me to go through the list or not, but there are others, and I don't want people to be kind of pigeonholed that, okay, well where's your own physical trauma? Where's your own sexual trauma? No, if my best friend was sexually traumatized, that is trauma to me.
A good example of
by
that,
extension.
you're talking, and what she's also talking about is indirect trauma.
Indirect trauma, absolutely.
When everybody remembers September 11th.
11th, oh my God,
Okay,
yes.
all right, when those planes went into the Twin Towers. You have people who were watching the event in California. They weren't there at Ground Zero.
My parents were in Nigeria. They weren't in Ground Zero.
And you got, and those people who are still, and those people who weren't even there are having, some of them are still going to counseling because they can't even get on a plane.
Oh, well.
Okay, so again, trauma and the new type of, since the genome has been coming out,
yes, sir.
They have been finding these new studies, and it's only recent. They're not concrete, but it's at the beginning stage of these type of research, that what happens genetically, because we all carry the minds of those who come before us. And basically that's what Dr. Lulu is trying to say, that whatever happened to us before the age of 18 is affecting how we view the world, especially to those people we hold dear, like mothers and fathers.
Yes.
And let's go, and we're talking about post-traumatic slave syndrome. We're saying in these series of talks that the umbrella of enslavement, a lot of the disease processes, I know this might be hard for some of you to believe, that some of these disease processes that suffered in the African American community. You know, now I'm not saying it only in us, but we're focusing on us, because that's what this show is about.
Exactly.
Our story, our history, that we are not the etymology or the sources of diseases. Studies have been done on other groups. Again, like I said, we said in the last show, it was done, there's studies that have been done with the survivors of the Holocaust in Germany. And it showed their children and grandchildren are getting anorexia or all these other things that, associated with PTSD.
Yes.
But when it comes to people of African descent, somehow that cognitive dissonance that we brought up at the end of last show kicks in when the dominant group don't want to face the what they call it, the sins of this country. But this country is 240-something years old. Enslavement in the land that became the United States is 400 years old. It's that, as of August of 2019, from 1619 to 2019. So we're saying that trauma is transmitted biologically.
Yes.
And that's what the studies are showing now. So we must look at how it affects us. Answer the question, why? That's what you said in what you said earlier.
And epigenetics is such an exciting, I mean, when I discovered that, I was like, yes!
Yes, I did too.
Oh my God, this is so exciting. Like, yes, now there's a reason.
Could you explain what
epigenetics is? Basically, epi is above. Genetics is, in other words, this particular finding is beyond what genetics can explain.
Outside the genes.
Yes, it's outside of genealogy. It's not just, okay, my dad has black eyes, so I have black eyes. No, if I come up with blue eyes, why? Because of, so something like that. So this is beyond the realm of genetics. It cannot be explained by solely genetics. If your mother experienced trauma while she's pregnant with you, she can, yes sir, transmit the trauma to the child.
Across the umbilical cord.
Of course. And then, like you mentioned about ACEs, the fact that if your child goes through the trauma of anything, police brutality, microisms, microaggressions, profiling, all of those things, and you come home every day and you're telling your kids about it, your kids learn it and they also absorb it. And as they go out, they get conditioned. Well, if my dad got arrested yesterday for no reason, that might be me today. So we have this tendency to just kind of stay on high alert. And it's not healthy for the people. And they found now that that can cause us to have diabetes and chronic lung disease and cancer. And then you ask me, well, why do African Americans have this? Because of the trauma.
Because of the latent trauma.
Autoimmune diseases, lupus, arthritis. I was like, what? If the doctors can't hear that, then I don't know what else to say, because this is like real. Like we now have a reason why
There
these
is
things are happening.
literally research that's proving that
this
these
is,
things
yeah, this
are
is,
passed on. And going back again to enslavement, you have 246 years of rapes, whippings, social
lynching.
lynchings, and all these type of social horrors.
Social horrors
All
is the
right, that
word.
you can't, that does not stop. It doesn't. There's no army coming through in the 1600s or the 1700s that freed slaves and they got free to be themselves. There was continuous stresses outside outside in the
that.
environment of enslavement within the society by law. They were called black codes. Okay, you had certain types of behavioral system. A culture shapes the ideas and thinking of the people.
That's right.
And like I said in the last show, the actions of the first generation becomes the history of the following generation. And the history and experience of those following generations become the culture of a people. So if you are a white person, this is where the term white privilege comes from. It was created by law. There was no such thing as white people in the early 1600s. They were English, they were French, they were whatever they were.
I get it.
Okay? And until there was laws that were put in called black codes, which defined how black people were going to be treated who were enslaved and how white people were going to be treated, it produced certain behavioral patterns. And then it created an environment in those patterns that was terrifying and controlling for the blacks
people.
And dominated and giving them an idea of privilege. For the white dominated, and it still exists to this very day.
I was just going to add that. I was just going to add the fact that, you know, let's just say anyone who's watching this show has been living under a huge rock. Let's just say you don't know anything about slavery. I forgive you. But what I won't forgive you is that you do not know that it's happening
right
today.
in front of your face.
I can give you 37 names right now of black people who have been police profiled, have had police brutality, have died in police custody, are constantly being jailed every day just because you don't have to do anything, just be black, and we're going to deal with you. How much trauma is that? If you don't believe anything about it, let's just say you forget slavery, if it's possible. What about today?
Yeah.
What about today? Yesterday I had a video that was viral on Twitter. The current president was the voiceover, and they were showing what they did to black people in his political, arenas, and they side by side with what they were hosing down black people in the days of the
civil rights
movement.
Yeah.
Side by side, and he was saying in the video, you could hear him say, in those days, police will deal with them right there and right now. They would tear him apart. Words like that coming from the head of the house?
Triggers.
Come on, y'all.
Triggers PTSD.
Don't tell me that that's not going to, if my grandfather was a slave, don't tell me that that's not going to make me go bonkers. And yet, we as a people, we have this resiliency that I don't even know where, it has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, and that's what we want people to know.
I love that.
Yeah, we don't want you to feel sorry for us.
Yes.
We want to understand that but we have to understand. When you disconnect the people from all their social behaviors, we learn to be men and women in Africa through rites of passage. You were not born to be a woman. You were taught how to be a woman. You were not born into manhood. You were taught how to be a man. But you were disconnected from that for hundreds of years and given another identity called shiftless, or you're not this, or you're not that, or you're all these negative things to justify a system called enslavement.
That's right.
But you have to make that, like we said earlier, that cognitive dissonance ease in the dominant group who benefited from that. So you got to understand that those type of behavioral patterns have an effect. There is a study that many of you might know, and I think Dr. Lulu heard of it. It was by a black couple in New York, in Harlem. They were called the Mamie and Kenny Clark.
Clark, yeah.
The Clark experiment, and they were famous for
Ah,
because their study
that was an
was
eye-opener.
important to the Brown versus the Board of Education, and that's called they give a euphemism now called it the doll study, but it was the black and white doll study.
Let's come out and call it what it is. You know,
that's
because the original term was black and white doll.
And how it worked was they would have these children way under 18 years old.
I don't know, like
six, five, 4 years, and they would ask them a series of questions. And the question was, they were all black children. And what they would say was, which is the good doll?
Yes.
And the child would pick up the white doll.
Never failed.
And
Never
which
failed.
was the uglier doll?
Yes.
They would point to the black doll. Which one looked like you? Do you know that some of those children were so upset to have to answer that question at 3, 4, 5 years that they actually ran out of the room.
They left and cried.
And Mamie Clark is like Dr. Umoja here. She loved her children. She was so upset by what she saw with these toddlers. How could these kids who were barely in school know how to look inferior to themselves?
Already, like it's the same thing.
Epigenetic.
Exactly, and preconditioning. I mean, it's preconditioning.
Something in their environment.
They've never really. It's not like. Yeah, it's not like they've traveled out.
Or they were told by their parents.
Yeah, it's not like they were even like necessarily profiled themselves, but they knew instinctively.
There's something was wrong
with them.
Yes,
with them. And I was the same way when I was growing up. Maybe not so much for me, but many people that I know. Because when I was growing up, the only doll that I had was the doll with the blue eyes, with the long, straight, golden hair. And while I liked to play with it, and then when I finally got a doll that had thick afro hair, I didn't like it because I can't comb his hair. Why is this doll? Doll? I can't comb this doll's hair. But this is the doll that looks like me.
Dr.
But something as simple as that. Yes.
Can I stop where you were about that doll with the hair? To show you how crazy some of the enslaved ideas that still permeate our culture that we must address and get rid of that came from that trauma, we put a moral label on our hair. How many times and how many people have heard somewhere, if you're black, you've heard it, that, boy, that baby got good hair. That was not the kind of thought that we had when we came from Africa as Yoruba or Fani or Angolan or Congolese that were kidnapped. But 200, 300 years later, we're saying that about ourselves as adults. Good hair. And the only reason it's good hair because it looks like the people who dominated us.
That's
so
right.
just like you have what they call the Stockholm syndrome.
Oh my
when
God.
when you're
the
under
victim.
you take on the personality
yes.
of the dominant group. And that's what we're saying. A lot of the things when we're disconnected from our history and our knowledge of self, whose information were we working on?
But you know, you don't even have to go too far. I mean, I went to my childhood because indeed I have natural hair. But you don't have to go too far. Get out of your house and walk down the street. How many African American women have natural hair? Now, these days, natural hair is the in thing.
They're starting though.
It's beginning to catch.
Yeah.
But once upon a time, everybody, even today, the Beyoncés and the Lucy Lou's, if I must say so. But they have big straight hair. Everybody has big hair. You know it's not their hair, but it's like, oh no, oh my God, I gotta have my wave, I gotta have my wig. And I'm not trying to say anything.
No.
You know, whatever, just do you, what makes you feel empowered. I'm all about empowering people.
But who gave you the idea?
But where'd you get the idea that your hair is
you were
not good
born
enough?
that way. Yeah.
Your hair is not good enough. If you walk into a job interview, you have dreadlocks, they ask you to first cut your locks. Why? What is my lock? How is my locks threatening your productivity? How does that even make sense? But then over years, we're like, okay, I better go straight my hair. Better go make my hair look more acceptable. What is acceptable hair?
Whose
Where
idea?
did it come from?
Those are remnants of enslaving ideas. And until we recognize that and show the fact that those things are, you got 246 years of trauma. Okay, from 1619 to 1865, no counseling. Now you have a school shooting today, right? And
the whole city gets counseled.
Yeah, you get. What's the first thing they tell you when those kids by the afternoon they're having counseling?
Yes.
But you have 246 years of this kind of trauma, generational trauma. Nothing.
Nothing.
All right? Then from 1865 to 1965, you have segregation, Jim Crow, apartheid, no counseling. And you think that 346 years of trauma, generational trauma,
Will be fixed by the wave of a hand.
and it's only, 50-something years since the 1960s? And we think that we have dealt with that those underlying problems and literal medical conditions that you mentioned have not been addressed.
Yes.
We have the fact that we have soul food, great, but the history of soul food was the worst part of the pig.
Exactly.
Our ingenuity made it taste better.
You know what? I got to give you a knuckles for that. That is so true. I've not had, I lived in South Carolina, and I saw soul food, and I saw the ingredients, and you could tell it was cooked with love. And to me, love tastes so good. But love was the main ingredient to make the pig intestines taste good. It was the leftover food that we had to cook. And because we cooked it with love. And
our brilliance and our African knowledge.
Creativity, yes. And the fact that we know that you put a pinch of this, a dash of that, and a whole lot of love, the food comes out tasting, Mama, what did you put in this, man? Don't worry about it.
But it's detrimental to our health.
Yeah, but then again, exactly. So even when epigenetics and ACEs and all that have already set the stage, we now throw in what we eat because, you are what you eat, God.
And that's part of what Dr. Umoja is talking about is part of the epigenetic studies that are going on as we speak. They're saying it's not like Pavlov and all those other psychological studies which they talked about conditioning. They're saying in epigenetical terms, which is the latest discovery based on the genome studies that have been done in the 21st century, that your environment will trigger your genes to change.
To morph, yes.
Whether it's good or bad, but if it's under trauma,
then it's never good.
Then it's never good.
It's never good.
Before we go, I'd like to put up some of these symptoms of PTSD, if the control room could put them up. Now, you'll see some, these are not all of them. This is from the DSM. For anybody who's done psychology, that's the book that everybody, that they get all these symptoms for these psychological conditioning. You see a feeling of foreshortened futures, just an exaggerated startle response, outbursts of anger, difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, or hypervigilance like Dr. Umoja talked about. But let's leave that up there. How many people have seen on videos when a black man is stopped by a police car and he's agitated? Now, to the police, white police officers, he looked like he's guilty.
Threats. He's a threat.
But not if he's not trained in what we're talking about today in his training of the PTSD that 400 years of slavery has been, and the epigenetic transference of those type of behavioral patterns through the generation. He would not have a clue. And that is dangerous for our children.
And then to add insult onto injury, the gentleman who's looking at the black man at the light, he is saying to you after he shoots the black man, I felt threatened. How do you feel threatened? You are the dominant, so to say, power. You have a gun. We have a man who is afraid for his life, therefore having anger outbursts, startling response, and he's hypervigilant naturally. And then you shoot him, not even taking a minute to say to yourself, wait, why is he doing that?
That's the
why
cognitive
is he
dissonance.
Acting that way?
Cognitive dissonance kicks in.
I can't take that. I can't take the fact that they shoot our boys like...
But look, but you said earlier, every time your son...
For acting appropriately.
Yeah.
For acting
appropriately. But that's not reckonedly...
And when a black woman is angry because you call me everything underneath the sun that is not good, you call me an angry black woman. Why will I not be? Am I not the mother of the earth? Am I not the woman that birthed the child that I just watched get shut down and gunned down in cold blood? Why will I not be angry? Why wouldn't they allow us to be normal?
And and guess what?
It is okay for me to be an angry woman if my son is getting hunted down. I get emotional when I talk about this because My boys go out in the house. They are normal, innocent
see
boys.
the-
As soon
you
as
see
they walk
that- see
outside
how
the
her
house,
passion
they are
is?
suddenly a threat. How is my beautiful son, who is 14 years old, because he's 5'11" and walks with his hair or his pants down, how is he a threat to a man who has a gun? How do you explain that to a mother and then want the mother to be okay? It is so wrong. It is wrong on every level. I can't take it.
But what you're seeing has been felt by every black woman since enslavement. What she's feeling today in 2019, look at the tears and the passion in her eyes, because she is a black mother. Imagine an enslaved mother in the 18 or the 1700s, whose young black boy is going out into a slave society. He is 10, acting no different than any young black, any kid. But her chances of him being either sold off, murdered, lynched,
Tied at the stick
Yeah.
and whipped until his skin
Peel-
is peeling,
peeling.
with hide.
and if you don't understand that trauma,
Don't tell me.
246 years of enslavement, and then another 100 years of terrorism by Ku Klux Klan and segregation laws. All these things traumatize a people. And then you're told that our women are hypersexual,
Yeah.
even though you created a system where
Where they
black
were
men were
sexualized.
they were studied to sell the children off.
goodness.
They had studying farms. No different than the horses and cows. That's why they call it chattel slavery. Just like cattle, we were treated like that. You stud dogs, black men and women were stud. So these ideas of who we are sexually, over-sexualized women, men who consider themselves studs, why did we have
Where
these
did we come
ideas?
from? And
You
then
got
the
to
worst thing
understand
is,
that.
the worst thing is now when we
You
now
okay?
turn against ourselves. I'm okay. When we
Yeah.
now turn against ourselves, that is the worst part. But yeah, because we have been conditioned to hate ourselves.
What's in the mirror?
And
Look at
so
the
there's
dog
black
test.
on black violence is like everywhere because you have been conditioned that nothing
Dr.
black is good.
Dr. Clark's test proved that with the black and white dolls. And that was in the 1940s. We're in 2000 and we still don't have that discussion. Now we got less than 24 minutes, and you see
Seconds.
24 seconds. You see that this topic is something that has to be continued. If it's not here, it must be in your
Your
house.
homes, yes.
Get that book,
Start talking about it.
Post-Traumatic
Start talking about it.
Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy. But until then, peace, hotep, bye-bye.